Taste of rivalry week in September, movement in the AP rankings, and who's not getting their due from me. And College GameDay calls an audible. Glad to have you with us on the College GameDay Podcast. Rece Davis, Pete Thamel. Delighted to be joined by the great Bill Connelly, father of SP Plus. And if your stocks are doing well, probably father of the S&P Plus too, although I don't know if that's the right thing or not. Let's start, guys, with where College GameDay will be this week. For the first time in my tenure, and this is my 10th year on the show, College GameDay is going to South Carolina. Now, I've been to Williams-Brice Stadium many times, called Thursday night games there. I was there for Spurrier's debut, a few other times over the years. But really looking forward to taking the show to South Carolina, which was not what we expected. When we left Michigan on Saturday, and we're looking forward to the afternoon and evening of games, we were keeping an eye on the Kentucky-South Carolina game in anticipation of following the one, meaning the number one ranked team, Georgia, on its first step of what it looks to be a daunting road schedule going to Kentucky. And then, old Cocky just came out there and just clawed the Wildcats' eyes out. Can't go there anymore. So one of the things that came up when you're making a decision is, okay, LSU, South Carolina. South Carolina's just won this big game. It's a great environment. They're in Columbia, South Carolina. But then the notion was broached by me and maybe others that maybe Columbia, Missouri, with Boston College calling, would be a good venue. Ultimately, we decided on going with the Gamecocks. And Pete, before we even started here, our friend Bill Connelly, proud Missouri grad, first thing, right out of the gate, Bill goes, "You're in the wrong Columbia." Has he said that to you too?
Columbia resident Bill Connelly, by the way, not only a grad but also a local in Columbia. I would be curious, Bill, how much excitement there is in your Columbia for these Boston College Eagles.
More than maybe a couple of weeks ago. The schedule is certainly, we talked about Missouri's schedule a lot in the offseason. Didn't seem like a very daunting non-conference schedule by any means. Missing a lot of the better teams in the SEC. It was kind of for the SEC, a pretty weak slate, but suddenly, you've got a weird quarterback you have to somehow wrangle against Boston College. Then you have to do the same against Vanderbilt next week with Diego Pavia. So it's a very weird schedule now for Missouri. And, after last season's breakthrough, I think the expectations are pretty high. They're still expecting a pretty big win, and we'll see if that's actually how things play out.
We're getting ahead of the challenge in front of Missouri this week with Boston College. And you have a couple of ranked teams. You've got, you've got Eli Drinkwitz, who, by the way, will be on the show. I know we're not going to the Columbia you prefer, but Drink, always entertaining, will be a guest on College GameDay Saturday morning live from the field. They kick off, I think, 11:45 local, I think. So they won't be right in the noon window, noon Eastern window, 12:45 Eastern. They kick off against BC. So
Can we ask Bill what's at his tailgate first? It's big Saturday. Bill gets the trappings of the fan, which I'm always just internally jealous of. Now, we love our jobs and what we do, but boy, sometimes you walk by a slow cooked like pork loin sitting there in the parking lot. You're like, that looks like fun. A couple cold beverages. What do you got, Bill? Saturday?
No, I would have put all plans on hold had you guys been coming to town on Saturday. But yeah, I think, it's you only have so many options when you're kicking off at 11:45. There's going to be a breakfast theme for the most part, but you will still smell smells as you walk through to the game, I'm sure.
That's not even early enough for Matt Rule. Did you see Matt Rule earlier?
That's right. Yeah.
He said he would go eggs, and football and kick off at 9 a.m. if he wanted to. Matt likes to get up and at him and do a little football. Before we move to LSU, South Carolina, Bill brought up Boston College's schedule, Missouri's schedule, and now with Boston College being a prominent part of it, how can this help the perception of how good Missouri is, or how good Boston College might be if they could go in there and get a win?
I feel like the entire country watched BC run roughshod over Florida State that Monday night, and BC looked like the epitome of a competent football team. They had one penalty on special teams. They were clean. Every wheel route Bill could have scored on was so wide open. Thomas Castellanos, when he pulled the ball, there were just like acres of grass in front of him. And he's a dynamic player. I actually was texting with Bill O'Brien today, and I said, what's most improved about Castellanos, who he's called the most improved player on their roster? And he said his footwork and reading of defenses. And it makes sense, right? Last year, he didn't even start the opening game for BC. He came in late against Northern Illinois, led him to a couple touchdown drives, which forced overtime in that game. So this is his first offseason operating as a starter. And if there's one thing Bill O'Brien can do, it's coach quarterbacks. Now, he's the head coach. He didn't actually call the plays, which I thought was interesting against Florida State. Will Long, the OC, did. But Bill's got his hands on the quarterback. Jonathan DiBiase is the quarterback coach there, but Bill is intricately involved, and there has been a delightful progression of Thomas Castellanos from last season to this season. You saw it with his poise and his decision-making and obviously his footwork.
Bill, I want to ask you this. Now, you've watched these teams closely. You've broken down the numbers. New defensive coordinator at Missouri and Corey Batoon, they haven't allowed anybody to score, but certainly this is going to be elevated competition. And Castellanos, for all of the dynamic running that he's done, he's thrown 26 passes in 2 games. Now, he has thrown 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. I assume that Missouri will be able, or at least will attempt to make Castellanos prove that he can beat them in the passing game.
You would think so, yeah. I think the main impression I've gotten from the Missouri defense so far, and acknowledging they've played Murray State and Buffalo, this feels like, I've been in Columbia, Missouri a while. This feels like the fastest Missouri defense I can remember seeing. It felt like a lot of times against both teams, Murray State and or Buffalo got them on the wrong foot, had a nice misdirection or got a step on somebody, and then that step just vanished. And so this is going to be the ultimate test of, BC has some fast guys. They've got some, a relatively powerful run game. It'll be an interesting, I'm going to assume BC scores. And the scoreless streak ends pretty soon. But it'll be a really interesting test at a really interesting time for Missouri. Other side of the ball, I'm also very curious whether Missouri has discovered their big play capability that they haven't really homed in on yet this year. They haven't really made any big plays. They've been super efficient. I have for my Friday preview, I've got an efficiency and explosiveness chart that I set up, and they're basically right next to Army on that chart so far this year, which is not what it was expected at all. They're probably going to need some easy points in this one, and we'll see if they can, conjure up those big plays again.
Doesn't Theo Weiss have like 30 receptions?
Yeah, it's been a nice little decoy thing for Luther Burden III. He came out firing out of the gates last year with a ton of receptions, and so they appear to be saving him for later in the year. But Theo Weiss had a really nice game against Buffalo.
In the other Columbia, or the Columbia, depending on your perspective, South Carolina and LSU, and the Gamecock defensive line wreaked havoc against Kentucky. One would think that it would be a different situation against LSU on Saturday at noon Eastern time. Yet, the LSU offensive line, for all the accolades that they get and the 2 presumed first-round tackles that they have, Will Campbell, Emory Jones, they don't have a rushing touchdown yet this season, and they're averaging fewer than 4 yards per carry against Nichols. They had, and after the USC loss, they had 64 yards rushing. Gamecocks have a good pass rush. They create negative plays. They also give up a lot of negative plays, as I'm sure Bill will point out when South Carolina has the ball. But this feels like a really significant, important game for LSU and Brian Kelly, so that we're not sitting here talking about the same things over and over again. And up to this point, there have been flashes. Nussmeier's been terrific, but defensively, they haven't yet gotten the game-wrecking control from Harold Perkins that you would think. They haven't really run the ball that effectively. And while it feels like it's all house money, Pete, for South Carolina, because South Carolina, not quite to the level of Appalachian State stealing GameDay from Texas A&M a couple years ago. They stole GameDay. They're undefeated. They are the first team in the history of the new 16-team SEC. They are the first conference leaders with a 1-0 record, against Kentucky. And now it's all seashells and balloons and gravy for them, it seems, and a little heat on LSU.
I would say this, Rece. I'm excited for this Columbia for one reason. South Carolina's fan base has endured a lot of bad football, and they have shown up like zombies, like a JV Nebraska. Like those fans have been there. They have been electric. And I've obviously only been there for ranked teams and big games, be it Bama, Georgia over the years, those types of games. And that place has been electric every time I've walked in there. And you felt it sort of unfurl under Holtz, and then Spurrier ramped it up a notch. And I really feel like we will be in for a completely overwhelming environment on Saturday, which can carry right into kickoff. I just think it's a tale of two units for South Carolina. I have a lot of faith in their defense. We're going to hear a lot about Dylan Stewart this week. He may be the best freshman edge in the country. Good for Shane Beamer for letting him rip and go in the quarterback. Hit the polish of his pass rush moves from talking to some scouts and from talking to some agents who, quite frankly, are excited about him and his potential is next level. So it'll be fun to see him go against those tackles. The other guy I've heard a lot about this week is the safety Nick Emenwari. He had a pick 6 against Kentucky. That was a huge play. He's a true junior. He's from Columbia. South Carolina was his only Power 5 offer. He's developed into one of the top safeties in the country. He'll be in our draft conversations come this spring. I am not confident South Carolina is going to be able to move the ball a ton against LSU. I think we could be in for a pretty good slog. I do feel like this about LSU's offense. Someone on the A&M staff when I was there for game day said this about LSU last year. It wasn't the plays that scared us. It was the players. So they had the real dudes, quarterback, receivers, obviously the talented younger linemen. And Garrett Musmeyer looked good. You called that game, Rece. Like he looked polished. He looked poised. He looked good. Yeah. I just feel like they were a little out of rhythm once they got to the red zone and squandered some opportunities. And some of that comes with a new play caller in Joe Sloan. Some of that comes with new guys in new places. Some question marks at tailback. So that this will be a hard place for LSU to find answers to the questions because they kind of mopped around against Nichols too. It is not going to go on many teach tapes in Greater Baton Rouge.
I'm going to give them, first of all, a little bit of a break on Nichols because you can't convince them that they were the players. I mean, that they were in any danger, even though that's unwise, but you can't convince them. That's a time-honored fact. So that's one thing. They also had a short week. They came back off disappointment. I'll give them a pass. One thing I do think bears watching, as terrific as Will Campbell is, and I'm not trying to pick on him, but he had a couple of false starts and kind of, let Nussmeier know in Vegas that he couldn't hear. You think you couldn't hear in Vegas when the majority of the crowd was LSU. The communication is my point in bringing it up. My point is not to pick on Will, who's a great player, probably going to be top 10 draft pick. And if you want to choose anyone to deal with those dudes at South Carolina, he would be right near the top of the list. But they had some communication line being able to hear snap count, false starts, things like that could be costly to the offense if South Carolina can stay in the game. And you said you spoke to scouts. I was talking, as I often do, with my buddy David Pollack this week, and I think his reaction to Dylan Stewart was good Lord with some of the advanced pass rush techniques and the speed that he has coming off the corner. Bill, you got anything on this game that is particularly
silent protest from Bill? He says,
right, I refuse
the other Columbia.
He's not talking about the game at this Columbia.
This is a really fun game. It's just because everywhere you look, it's strength versus strength or weakness versus weakness. Nussmeier hasn't been sacked, I don't think, this year, and South Carolina's made quite a few of them. And meanwhile, LSU doesn't even. Of course, they don't have a rushing touchdown because they don't run. And that's an area where South Carolina could actually be vulnerable, but LSU's not going to find out. So, I assume LSU still has the edge here, but. If they can't throw, if they can't make big plays in that regard, it'll quickly turn into a slog that South Carolina could win.
We continue on the College GameDay podcast, rivalry games that we are delighted that are actually being played and should continue to be played, and who's not getting their due in the rankings. We talk about it all in a matter of moments. Welcome back to the College GameDay podcast. Rece Davis, Pete Thamel, and Bill Connelly with you. And Bill, the three of us love the tradition of the sport. And when the Pac-12 became the two-pack, and left only Washington State and Oregon State, I think there was a fear that no more Apple Cup, no more game of what used to be called the Civil War, Oregon State. But they're going to play. They're playing early. And it's the first time in over a century that I think Oregon State both come in with perfect records. And the first thing to say is that these games need to be played every year. If you have to adjust from playing them at the end of November to playing them now, so be it. I mean, Iowa and Iowa State have gotten away with playing early, and Cy-Hawk, and that still carries a lot of significance and intensity, and I would assume the same would be the case here. But I know as a guy, and from reading your columns, you have championed, for lack of a better way, the little guy a little bit and how they're overlooked with the powers that be. There will be, I think, an extra edge of intensity to prove something. All of the chemicals that fire in the brain when you're at the peak of your intensity will be going for the Beavers and also for the Cougars. Let's start with the Oregon State game, simply because Oregon probably hasn't looked as sharp as they would hope in their first two games. Now, Idaho's a good team at the FCS level. Boise State might wind up in the playoff. I'm not trying to diminish those two teams, but if you're a top 5, top 6, top 7 team in the country, one would think at home that you would dispatch those two teams with a little bit more ease than the Ducks had. Beavers, go to San Diego State, screw up my Superdog, look really good. And, maybe there's a little something there that they can exploit when those two meet again.
Yeah, well, first of all, I was much more excited about this game when I saw that it was supposed to be 68 and rain, because I really, I want it to look like it's the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and maybe that, helps in that regard. But no, I mean, this has put up or shut up for Oregon now. They've, with my SP Plus projections, the only team that has underachieved in the first 2 weeks more than Oregon was UTSA, and they've had some injury problems and just no-showed against Texas State. Oregon's come up 50 points short against projections so far. And if they do that again, Boise State's probably better than Oregon State, but Oregon needed 2 return touchdowns to win that game. And so if they don't start improving now, Oregon State's going to be more than happy to take away that unbeaten record. So kind of needs to, they need to start proving that they're the top 5 team we thought they were. Otherwise, Oregon, or Oregon State, they prevent big plays pretty well. Oregon hasn't made many of those. Oregon stays on schedule pretty well, but so does Oregon State. It becomes a really interesting game if Oregon just really isn't the top 3 or 5 team we thought they were.
So I think it's interesting that because of transfers, because their O-line was so good last year, and because they have really good tackles, quite frankly, on paper, we thought Oregon's run game was just going to translate this season, and it just simply hasn't. They've had weaknesses on the interior of that offensive line that have been exploited both weeks against, quite frankly, a lot different looking defensive tackles than they're going to see once they start going into Big Ten play. So I really feel like Oregon's rush offense, ranked 104th in the country right now, is something they desperately need to creatively find some solutions to. So again, not all this is on Dylan Gabriel. I really feel like that has been, Idaho especially, sort of made that a glaring 5-alarm. We need to fix fire on the interior of that Oregon OL, and I am sure that Oregon State is going to do everything possible to exploit that.
You fellas like the history of this rivalry, don't you? The last time that both teams came in with perfect records, meaning unbeaten and untied, final score of the game was 4-0.
Wow.
Yeah, Oregon Agricultural College, which became Oregon State, won 4-0. You know how they got the 4? You don't.
I mean, I would think 2 safeties, Rece, but I don't.
Pete, that would be
touchdown?
Incorrect. No, and that would be a good guess, but apparently this particular year, field goals in this game were worth 4 points. So they got the 4-point field
What year?
goal. That was 1907.
Oh, okay.
And then, of course, and for the history buffs who know some of this rivalry, they've had games, where they were playing for the Rose Bowl. That's been rare. But there was the infamous 1983 Toilet Bowl. There had been a major shipwreck near Newport, Oregon, spilled hundreds of thousands of gallons of crude oil into the ocean, freezing rain in Autzen, maybe the worst football game ever played. Both teams down at third-string quarterbacks. They each tried 2 field goals, missed them both. Combined, there were 11 fumbles. They lost 6 of them, 5 interceptions. Oregon scored twice, but had them called back by penalties. And I believe it to be the last 0-0 tie in the history of college football because there was no overtime. So I think we're going to get a better game between these two on Saturday.
Was there a meme of like the Frank Beamer of that era with his arms over his head that lived on
exactly
forever?
Because then they played overtime and somebody scored and won the game in the Virginia Tech Wake Forest game that ended regulation 0-0. And then you have Washington State and Washington. They're playing in Seattle, though not at Husky Stadium. This has been an odd thing, and we haven't spoken a lot of Washington because Washington is not what it was last year. Not only is the whole coaching staff gone, the players are gone for the most part, save a couple of starters on defense. New coach. The athletic director is the former Washington State athletic director. And Pete, if you've been in the midst of all of this in covering it, Washington State always has a little bit of an edge when you deal with these guys. They have the better win of the two teams up to this point in the season, beating Texas Tech. John Mateer, their quarterback, leads them in rushing and passing, and a long touchdown run against the Red Raiders. This feels like one the Cougs could get. Do you agree with that?
It would be interesting, Rece, and one of our ninja statisticians could tell us this. The last time both state schools won in this rivalry, I'd be curious. It might have been like 5 years ago. I don't know that, but yeah, no, I feel like this is a very attainable game for Washington State. I mean, they smoked Texas Tech. Now, Texas Tech didn't have starting running back Taj Brooks, but there's an efficiency on offense for Washington State that's very real, and I think there's a certainty to what we're going to get from Washington State, and I think there's an aura of uncertainty about Washington. They have good players, Jonah Coleman. Will Rogers is obviously a proven guy at quarterback. Will Nixon, the tailback, is now at Syracuse. He was the backup last year. There's so much new at Washington, and I don't envy Bill when he has to like sort of statistically quantify all these, auras and mysteries here. But I do feel like both underdogs have like pretty clear lanes here.
So far, 13.8%. There's your stat for this game. That's the percentage of plays Washington State has run where they've gained at least 20 yards. That's second in the country so far. John Mateer, speaking of just statistical oddities all around, he almost made my top 10 Heisman list last week. In my columns, I award the Heisman every week, basically. He went 9 for 19 passing for 115 yards and almost made the Heisman list because of his rushing. They're a weird team. Like, they're just unorthodox. They're making a ton of big plays. Defense comes and goes. The one thing we know for sure about Washington so far, and it's against Weber State in Eastern Michigan, they have stayed on schedule. They're avoiding 3 and outs. They're staying very efficient on offense, and they're preventing big plays on defense. I think that second part's what's going to determine this game. Is if Washington State can't make big plays, I don't know that they've got enough to be consistent, but it won't take that many explosions to really make this an awkward game, even if it's, for whatever reason, not at either home stadium.
I'm looking forward to it big time. Oregon State is among the most played rivalries in college football. So too is Cincinnati, Miami, Ohio. They only have one more game scheduled. There have been some questions about whether either of these two games in the Pacific Northwest will be able to continue with the new schedules. Look, play those games. Cincinnati and Miami, come on. There's no conceivable reason why you guys can't play every year. And both sides kind of say, well, they're pointing fingers. The other side doesn't want to play, all of that. Play the game. Pete, you can get this done. Play these rivalry games, because as we transition in this realignment, and certain things are lost. And the realignment, while it can be exciting and good, create wonderful matchups. Texas, Georgia coming down the pike, USC and Michigan, that you see outside the Rose Bowl that'll be here shortly. Those are the good things. We can have those without cashing in all of the other things. And I'm going to look at the list here. I think Cincinnati and Miami is, the second or third most played rivalry in major college football. Yeah, it's tied. Once they play on Saturday, they'll be tied in a group for second with games like Auburn, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, and Oregon State. Those two games this weekend, Cincinnati, Miami, Ohio, Oregon State, they'll play for the 128th time. The only rivals that have played more often, Minnesota and Wisconsin in major college football. Lehigh Lafayette and all of that. You've got a few more. But in major college football, it's there. Don't give that away. Just play. You can find a week. Just play.
Don't lose the water cooler, right? If you work in downtown Cincinnati at an office building, there's a guy a couple cubicles over who played at Miami, and you're talking about the game all week. And if you schedule some directional of Louisiana, nobody cares. And those games are necessary, especially if you are in some far-flung conference where there is no geographical resonance outside of West Virginia, right? Don't lose the water cooler. Don't lose the water cooler. All these coaches are paranoid about losing, and ADs don't want to skip. No, play the game. And if you're Miami of Ohio and you realize you're losing the game, which is probably the highlight of the season for your fan base, do a 2-for-1, adjust. Don't acquiesce. Like there are modern gravities that are affecting the sport in a significant way. And I'm not pointing fingers and saying it's anybody's fault, but those guys should drive, meet at one of those god-awful chili places outside Cincinnati somewhere and hash out a deal for your fans. Don't neglect the fans. Cincinnati fans don't care about BYU. They don't care about Texas Tech. They care about Miami because there's mixed marriages that have Miami grads and Cincinnati grads. There's, pickup basketball games. There's just so much history. And if you're flushing that away, it is administrative malfeasance.
Right now,
and that goes for you too, Pitt and West Virginia.
Amen.
Continue to play there. Continue to play those games too. Who's not getting their due in the top 10, and a little bit of a peek ahead, and maybe one more history lesson when the College GameDay podcast continues. Back on the College GameDay podcast, Rece Davis, Pete Thamel, and Bill Connelly with you. Bill, as many know, I am a voter in the AP poll. You get a lot of grief about that because, as I've said often, they make you rank them in columns. They don't let you rank them in rows, which there's a lot outside of the top three, in my judgment. There are a lot of teams that would fit better side by side instead of one stacked on top of the other one. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of things that they will take exception to in my vote. The two that jump out at me, if I were critiquing my own ballot, and I'm wondering how these things stack up with your SP Plus rankings, is I still have Penn State at number 4. Reason being, I know about the Bowling Green game. I think they have the best combination of hostile environment plus team beaten in hostile environment. I think because I think West Virginia is probably better than Florida. I think West Virginia is probably better than Texas A&M. Time will tell. So I gave them some grace for the BG game. And then on the other side, the teams that I look at and I go, I don't think this is high enough. Miami, I have at number 10, and Missouri, I have at number 12. In theory, I don't see a lot of difference 4 through 12 or so. I think a lot of those teams are the same. According to SP Plus, am I way off on any of those 3 teams, either Penn State being way too high or Miami, Missouri being a bit low?
Well, you're definitely right that there's a bunching of teams there. When we did our, we do our Saturday night power rankings, the ESPN.com writers, and it was definitely, I got through the top 5 immediately. And then starting at number 6, I had absolutely no idea. And so, yeah, I think, right now SP Plus has a pretty clear top 5 in Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss. And I was surprised that Alabama stayed ahead of Texas last week, but whatever, they're really, really close. But then you've got like a 4-point drop off to Tennessee and Missouri right there at 6-7, and then Penn State at 8. Miami's at 10. They've caught up. I mean, a lot of this has to do with where they were in the preseason projections. So, because we've played 2 games, and so it's still mostly coming from those numbers. But yeah, 6 through 10 right now is really, really interesting. I think Tennessee is one of the only teams, by the way, that has actually looked like a top 5 team twice this year. So if you could make a case for putting them really, really high, even though they started lower.
I did. I have Tennessee number 5.
Yeah, no, I think that's extremely justifiable, even if NC State turns out to be a terrible disappointment, because they've been disappointed twice now. It's still extremely justifiable. But no, it's really fun. We've had about 4 teams that have absolutely looked like top 5 teams twice. Everybody else has kind of messed around and shown some flaws.
I'm curious about this, Rece, because I don't have a vote in the poll, thankfully, by the way, because these days I find myself nodding off watching Peacock somewhere around midnight as Ashton Genty is running wild through the Eugene mist. If Missouri dispatches Boston College, you have them anomalously low. Do you feel like they are then like top 8 team that they have a pretty good skin on the wall at that point?
Yeah, probably. I mean, probably so. It'll be a situation of, what does everyone else do relative to what my perception is of what Missouri did? Because the teams I didn't have Penn State and Tennessee that high in the top 5 to start. I'm a firm believer in that you move teams around. Now you still have to have some balance. You can't just wildly move everybody around. And I've probably been more skeptical of Miami, largely because I'm skeptical of Florida, but that was a great win. It's almost like, okay, I just want to see a little more consistency. I've got Alabama much lower than most. I have them at number 8 because I still think there will be growing pains with the new regime and all of that kind of thing. So I think there's a possibility certainly for Missouri to go in there. And to be totally transparent, I don't have Boston College in my top 25. So I think because of that, I mean, they're close. They're like in the group that I considered at the end. So it's not like I don't think Boston College is as good as who do I have? Like, you know what? I left Vanderbilt in, and I used that 25 spot a lot like Steve Spurrier used to when he voted in the coaches poll. And every year in the preseason, no matter how good or bad they were supposed to be, after he left Duke, he voted for Duke 25. Especially early in the season, you do something unexpected, you get off to a good start. I'd give it to you. I thought Virginia Tech, and still think Virginia Tech might be really good. Vanderbilt beat them, great win for them. 25, and we'll see how long that lasts. So Boston College certainly considered in that realm. I left Notre Dame in the rankings there because I still think they're good. They had a bad day. I put Northern Illinois 1 spot ahead of them because I feel like you gotta, at least for a week or two, that's the thing that drives people nuts. Everything can't be head to head over the course of the season. If maybe they won't, but if Notre Dame proves to be better than Northern Illinois, I'm not going to have any problem ranking Notre Dame ahead of them. But for this week, you try. Sometimes early on it becomes impossible because A beat B, who beat C, who beat A. And I don't think you always have to wait for that to happen to shake them up the way you think they ought to be. But it becomes easier, once you at least have that justification. So that's where it is. But you should move teams around a lot. You can't in your SP Plus because you're formula based. But when you're using the football judgment, the achievement based thing, you move around a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, it's a lot more fun that way. I usually just try to start from scratch, honestly, which takes probably 20 minutes longer than it should. But it's a lot more fun that way. And we're 2 weeks into the season. You can see whatever the heck you want to see right now.
Yeah. No question about it. So
maybe we'll squint and see the other Columbia Saturday morning, Bill.
the other Columbia, which is the home of the University of South Carolina. We're really excited about getting there. The Cockaboose tailgating out there. Sir Big Spur will be there. The 2001 and Sandstorm feeling. Shane Beamer will be there in Beamer ball and trying to pull off that big upset as they did against Tennessee a couple of years ago. Won't be that big if they beat LSU, but still sizable. And yet Here's our friend Bill Connelly saying that game day should be in Columbia, Missouri, rather than Columbia, South Carolina. And perhaps Bill Connelly is looking for a way to invoke a modern version of the chicken curse. Are you familiar with the chicken curse, Bill and Pete?
I'm vaguely familiar.
Okay, well, the chicken curse is basically the University of South Carolina existed. There were politicians, one of whom was named Pitchfork Tillman, and the other one, Thomas Clemson, and they wanted to establish an agricultural school in a different part of the state. A lot of people didn't like that. And at one point, Tillman threw down his pitchfork into the ground and declared the university cursed. And because of that, you know, with the exception of moments with Steve Spurrier, moments with Beamer, moments with Lou Holtz and Steve Tannehill, and my great friend, the legendary George Rogers, it seems like when things start to go well, they go sideways. So, Bill, have a heart. Have a heart. Don't try to reestablish the chicken curse, because there's still chances to come to Columbia, Missouri if your Tigers are as good as advertised.
I'm just saying, you know, clash of the Titans here in you know, it's not every day that such mighty Missouri and Boston College programs play each other, and we just missed opportunity.
I would say what you call a missed opportunity. I will say embracing an opportunity in Columbia, South Carolina. Can't wait to get there. Thanks for listening to the College GameDay podcast. Download them wherever you prefer to get your podcast, or better yet, subscribe and never miss an episode.